Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So hello everyone and welcome. It's good to be back at Temple leading the class. As you may or may not know, the past few weeks I've led it somewhere else. It's nice to be back in the main meditation hall. Just has a different feel to it, you know? So tonight's topic is a little more, I've planned ahead slightly more than I have been planning ahead in the last few classes, last couple weeks. So I came up with the idea for this topic at 6:40, so it's a little more prepared than when I just asked you guys to give me a topic. So when I was setting up the stream at 6:40, I was thinking about how, you know, the class's name is Dharma Bum Basics, and I was thinking about that term basics. And so I think we'll talk a bit about that today. And we have, one thing that I've always found kind of funny is, so we have two different classes that both sound like they're the entry-level class, right? We have Intro to Buddhism and Meditation, and then we have Dharma Bum Basics. So both of these, people will sometimes get confused as to which one's the best one to come to for their first time coming here. And of course, I'll always tell people go to Intro to Buddhism and Meditation, because Jeff's always the best introduction, in my opinion at least. And there's a distinction between those two terms, introduction and basics. An introduction only really happens one time. You become introduced to it, and then you become increasingly familiar with it. Basics are something that you can always draw strength from in this practice. They're basic not in the sense that they're the very beginner thing that you need to do. They're basic in the sense that they're core to this practice. They're one of the central components, or they're central components to this practice. When I'm talking about basics, I mean things like the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts, the 5 hindrances, those kinds of things. So these are core or central teachings to this practice. And it's important as a practitioner to have at least a basic grasp of them, a basic understanding of them. And that was really why I initially came up with the idea for this class and proposed it to Jeff, and then started leading it. I proposed it to Jeff that someone else lead it, and then Jeff said, great, you can lead it. So that's how that started. And so the general idea behind this class was that we go through once each week, and then I eventually change it to once a month. We go through core teachings of the Buddhist practice. We go through one of the Four Noble Truths each week, and then one of the Eightfold Path each month. And I will probably pretty soon, I'll go back to a weekly format just because these are recorded, so I don't need to, I did it monthly because not everyone would be able to make it to a specific fold of the path. Now, if you miss something, you can just rewatch it. So we'll probably do it weekly again, but I'll probably start something like a 9-part series on the Eightfold Path, Four Noble Truths, and then the Eightfold Path. I think that could be useful, could be beneficial. And it's really the most central teaching of this practice. So I think it's good to get a grasp on that. So we'll get started with the meditation. Since we're talking about basics tonight, we'll be doing the standard breath meditation. nothing too fancy. So if you're new to the meditative practice, few things to know before you get started. Nothing's going to happen to you. Your mind's not going to stop wandering. It's going to keep wandering. The key to this practice is beginning to recognize when the mind wanders and being able to bring it back to the present moment, back to sensation and awareness within this moment. In a lot of ways, it would actually be sad if the mind stopped while we sat here and meditated. Because while we're meditating, it gives us the opportunity to watch the mind without getting directly involved with it. And it's only by watching the mind and learning how the mind structures its perceptions, its opinions, and all of that kind of stuff that we begin to learn how to deconstruct harmful perceptions and opinions that we may be holding of ourselves or of the world or anything else for that matter. So don't think of it as a failure that the mind still keeps racing. Think of it as something you can step back and observe. It's beneficial that it's there because it's something we can learn from. We can't learn from it when we're all swept up in it, but when we've stepped back and we're watching it more like as opposed to watching the parade from the side of the street and just being blindsided by each thing that comes next, we're watching the parade from the helicopter view. We can see all the twists and turns because we've stepped back a bit. So that's what we'll be doing with this practice. We'll focus on the breath. Whenever the mind wanders, just bring it back. It's not a big deal. It's actually a wonderful success when you've noticed that the mind's wandered, because then you have the opportunity to bring it back. That's mindfulness. That's alertness. Being alert and aware that the mind has wandered, and then having the mindfulness, meaning keeping in mind that we're focusing on something else, the breath, and bringing awareness back. So that's what we'll be doing. I like to bring the shoulders up and back and relax down into a really sturdy posture. Tongue can be pressed up against the roof of the mouth, gently against the back of the teeth, prevents the buildup of saliva, which can become a distraction. If you need to move during the meditation practice, maybe give it 3 breaths, see if you still need to move, and then move gently, mindfully. There's nothing wrong with moving during the practice, but if you're fidgeting the whole time, it's maybe not as beneficial as it could be. With that, we'll get started. Closing the eyes and taking 3 deep breaths slowly. Noticing how the breathing process feels in this moment. Noticing if you can switch it up if it's not comfortable. You could maybe breathe deeper or more shallow, faster or slower, in long and out short, or in short and out long. Just adjusting the breath and finding out what feels best within this moment. And when you find it, you can maintain it for a while. You can even pose the question in the mind as to what type of breathing would feel the best for the body. What kind of breath would feel the most energizing or the most calming? Just pose that question in the mind and then watch how the body responds. Following the breath all the way in through the in breath and all the way out through the out breath. And as you maintain this breath awareness, you can begin to notice if there's any tension or constriction surrounding the breathing process. And see if you can soften that all the way through the in breath and then keep it released all the way through the out breath. So that you're not forcing the breath in or squeezing the breath out, but simply allowing it to ebb and flow. Giving it that space. Breathing in, relaxing tension in the breathing process. Breathing out, keeping the tension relaxed. with the breathing process relaxed, see if you can expand your awareness of sensation out from just the in and out breath to the sense of rising and falling throughout the body. That sense of rising on the in breath and falling on the out breath. Maintaining this awareness of rising and falling. Noticing if there's any tension in the forehead or the shoulders or the neck, the area around the eyes. See if you can dissolve that away bit by bit with each breath. Breathing in, aware of tension throughout the body. Breathing out, releasing tension throughout the body. If you want, you can think of the breath like water flowing through the body, washing dirt away, washing tension away. Recognizing distractions as they arise, recognizing thoughts as they arise, not gripping onto them, but also not pushing them away. Just allowing them to be there without interacting with them. The interacting is what feeds them. When we just observe, the distractions and the thoughts run out of fuel. And we're able to watch what happens when a thought runs out of fuel. We're able to notice how it feels for the body when a thought runs out of fuel. And with this body-centered awareness, watching thoughts arise and pass away, you can gradually, when you're ready, take 3 deep breaths. Slowly opening the eyes, just a little bit with each breath, never in a rush to leave the meditation. Reminding ourselves that even though the eyes are opened and we're engaging in the world again, the meditation's never truly over. All the sensations and awareness that you had for this past session, they're still actively there in the background. They're a place of stability and power that we can draw on throughout our day. And in turn, we can nurture throughout our day. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, we'll be talking about the basics tonight, what we really mean by the basics, their applicability throughout the entirety of the practice, not just the beginning. So I'm curious if anyone would like to share a particular Buddhist teaching you found kind of revolutionary in your life or transformative, something that's impacted the way that you view things or the way that you go about your day. I'm curious to hear. Because when I have this kind of discussion with people about what Buddhist teaching or practice has had the strongest, the most effective impact in your life, I do hear it, but it's very rare that someone mentions the more transcendent teachings like emptiness or even dependent origination, which you all know I'm a fan of, or non-self. And it's more often that it's these really core, basic little seeds of discernment that come from the practice that have made the biggest impact. So I'm curious if anyone would like to share what aspect of the Buddha's teachings had that impact for you. For me, I know you'll probably think I'm going to say dependent origination, but for me it was the very, very frank insight that I'm not my thoughts, that I'm not my thoughts, I'm not the content of my thoughts. And my thoughts don't necessarily dictate who I am as a person. They more so dictate who I have been in the past as a person, because they're a product of past conditioning. So for me, that really simple insight of I am not my thoughts. Just because I have bad thoughts doesn't mean I'm a bad person. Just because I have good thoughts doesn't necessarily mean I'm a good person. I'm just a person who's having thoughts. And to me, that was really liberating, because I spent all this time worried about, who I am, what I am, all this kind of circus of the mind stuff, when it's not necessarily that useful. And just that simple insight of all these things that are occurring, they're not necessarily mine, and I don't have to believe all of them. It's really useful. So Mach shared the teaching on we inter-are. That interdependence is a really, really beautiful teaching. It lets us know that we're never really alone, and we're never really on our own with things. So many causes and condition had to come together for us to be where we are at in this moment. And it wasn't 100% just our effort that got us here. It was a lot of people's effort, a lot of people's contributions that got us to the point that we're at now. Jean shared, I am not angry, sad, or whatever, but anger, sadness, and whatever has arisen. I love that. That's one that Bob shares often. And I've loved that since I first heard it. Just that shift in how we, I guess you could still call it how we label something, how we label an interaction like that, an interaction in the mind, has a huge impact. So it's not, I am getting angry, but anger has arisen. And it's similar to what I mentioned at the beginning of the parade, where you're either right at the side of the street watching the parade, getting blindsided by each thing that comes, or you can choose to be in the helicopter, seeing the parade in its entirety. It's that stepping back can be really beneficial. Another form of this that I really enjoy, because I have personally, I have sensory sensitivity issues. So like sensory hypersensitivity. So sounds and stuff like that are really unpleasant. And it was really helpful to me to kind of use the same type of formula, but use it as an unpleasant sound has made contact with the ear, and then just leave it at that, and not get into this ambulance siren is so noisy, it's so loud, it's giving me a headache. Now I can't see very well because my senses are overloaded. Now I'm irritated. Why do they need to have the sirens so loud? We can still see them, we can still hear them, blah, blah, blah. To just leave it at an unpleasant sound has made contact with the ear. And it drops all of that narrative through that one simple tweak on how our initial reaction to something is. So that's just one example of kind of the importance of the basics, these core teachings, these basic teachings. Is most people, when they share what teaching in Buddhist practice has had an impact on them, it's usually the rather mundane ones, the rather simple ones that have the biggest impact, because they're the easiest to implement. They're the easiest to directly apply throughout our daily lives. And that's what this practice is. This practice isn't just the culmination of one moment at however many years in the future when, boom, suddenly we're an awakened being. It's this consistent daily grind, this consistent daily practice. Drop by drop, water can erode rock, can dissolve mountains away. So the same for us, drop by drop, we erode our unskillful quality of mind away. And that same water then fosters and grows skillful qualities of mind, that same consistent, unyielding effort. While not super intense, it's super consistent. And that's where the power comes from. A consistent daily practice. There's a story that my teacher often tells, and it's one of his teachers. I'm not going to say who because I can't quite remember which one it is and I don't want to get it wrong. But he shares the story of when one of his teachers was getting older and he started to have like dementia, Alzheimer's issues. And he would start like hallucinating that there was a dog when there was no dog and things like that. And what he found really valuable with this practice is that by this very basic practice of observing things, really looking at things as they are and not our story piled on top of them, that helped him through it. Because when there wasn't a dog, or when there was a dog, when he saw one at least, he would question it. And through that kind of the habit that came from the basics, from cultivating these basics, he would be able to recognize that that dog wasn't real, it wasn't really there, and many other things like that. So even though the mind would start to play tricks on him, he had the composure to recognize when the mind was playing tricks on him, and was able to separate himself from the dementia. And I thought that that was really powerful, really fascinating. And that same teacher, when he started having these issues with his memories, he would give the same talk whenever he would give a Dharma talk. He would talk about the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the teacher, the teachings, and the community, and how they're a refuge for our practice. How the Buddha is a refuge because he's the example, he's the evidence that this practice can work. The Dharma is a refuge because it's the practice that helps us free ourselves from our own suffering. It's something we can take refuge in because it's something that's applicable to all people throughout all times. It's not something that was specifically inherent to the culture and customs at the time of the Buddha. It's something timeless. That's why the term noble is used. Noble can also refer to something that is timeless and universal. And then the Sangha is a refuge because in order for a true and lasting change, you have to be in an environment, or it's ideal to be in an environment that's reinforcing the change that you're trying to develop, instead of being in an environment that's constantly provoking backsliding. So the Sangha is a refuge because you can be surrounded by others who are focusing on the same goals, trying to accomplish the same task. They're trying to develop skillful qualities of mind and abandon unskillful qualities. So these basics, they're not just for beginners. This monk was a very respected, well-respected master in the Thai forest tradition. And when he was near the later portion of his life, he drew strength from these basics, from these basic principles. And he was able to apply them right then and there in that moment. So I find that a really beautiful thing. So that's what we'll be kind of covering for the next few weeks, probably next few months. Because these Four Noble Truths and this Eightfold Path really is the core teachings of the Buddha. So I want to really devote some time to each facet of it each week. So, yeah. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Marisha shared that she loved that rendition of the Triple Gem. I'm glad. It's good to get lots of different viewpoints on these teachings. but it's also important not to get lost in a thicket of views. So does anyone have any comments or questions or anything else like that? The one other thing I wanted to share about the basics, and if you have questions, feel free to keep typing. So one more thing that I wanted to share about the basics is kind of with any Buddhist practice, it's not something that you want to rush through. It's something you really want to dedicate some time to. I know that when we were doing classes here in person, we would go through the Eightfold Path. And then, we'd go through Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path. And a lot of the same people would come, relatively consistently as far as Dharma Bum consistency. They'd come relatively consistently. And then when we would start over, many of those people would stop coming. And having talked to some of them who had stopped coming, it's because they had already been through it. They already knew it. But there's a difference between intellectually knowing something and experientially comprehending it. So with these basics and with any Buddhist teachings in general, it's really dangerous to hold the idea that you fully comprehend any of it, because it's something to continually cultivate, continually revisit. I'll often joke that when I read a Buddhist book, it'll take me months, because even if it's a thin book, because it's not the type of thing that you want to rush through. It's the type of thing that you want to read a little bit of and then meditate. Read a little bit of and meditate. And see and reflect on it and see if you can put into practice these little tidbits that you gain from the book. Because what happens if we just rush through the books is we have a lot of intellectual understanding. I believe it was Ajahn Brahm who told a story about there was a monk in the Buddhist time who had memorized all of the Buddhist teachings verbatim. He memorized all of them, and he was really proud of it. He was really proud of this memorization, but he didn't comprehend any of it. He didn't realize that there was a distinction. And he came to the Buddha one day and bowed down and sat beside him thinking, oh, the Buddha will praise me for having memorized all his teachings, how great I am, blah, blah, blah. And the Buddha said, oh, welcome, empty book. And he called the monk Empty Book, because there was all of this intellectual knowledge, all of this scribe knowledge, but there wasn't any understanding. And Ajahn Brahm compared this to looking at a menu for a restaurant and then eating the menu instead of the food. So, yeah, just a fun little story for you there. I think we'll close tonight, and we'll be back next week with Four Noble Truths. If comfortable, please join palms. May any merit gained from this meditation and discussion be dedicated to all those who suffer at this time. May all beings in all directions, without limit or exception, be healthy, joyful, and at ease. May we all be healthy, joyful, and at ease. Metta karuna mudita peka sangha teya cetasa chaturisam bharatva viharati samabungarupa vena sammadhammarupa vena sammasangharupa vena sote huntu nirantaram.